Hey, Shadow Stalkers. Before we start today's story, we wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has been supporting us and our channel. Today's story was written by Tobias Malm. Please check out his new novel, The Cave to Another World. Now on Amazon. A link will be in our description. As evening came, it wrapped around our neighborhood like a cozy blanket. Our backyard was sprinkled with leftover fun. The grass was hiding deflated balloons, and the once twirling streamers were now just lying around, tired and still. Right in the heart of the yard stood the Bouncy castle, silent in the moonlight. It looked different now, like a quiet, sleeping giant instead of the lively, colorful place it had been all day. I stared at it, noticing how its plastic towers and bright walls made such a bold shape against the night sky. Yolanda, who was neatly folding up tablecloths, suggested we keep the Bouncy castle up so Ethan could play some more tomorrow. I agreed with a nod, but I couldn't ignore the eerie way the darkness seemed to fill the inside of the castle, like it was keeping the moonlight out on purpose. After tidying up outside, we headed back in to get Ethan and our little Ruby ready for bed. Once they were tucked, we plopped down in front of the TV to unwind. It wasn't long before we were ready to hit the sack, too. Today had been fun but exhausting, and sleep came easy. But the peace didn't last. In the middle of the night, Ethan showed up in our doorway, a teddy bear hugged tight in his arms, waking us up. "What's the matter, buddy?" I mumbled, trying to rub the sleep from my eyes. "Did a bad dream scare you?" He hesitated, his eyes wide with worry. Someone's crying in the Bouncy castle," he whispered. I figured it was just the night playing tricks on him. "It's probably the wind," I reassured him, though the silence of our house made me doubt my words for a second. Or maybe a cat found its way in there. "Do you want to come sleep in our room for the rest of the night?" Yolanda's sharp gasp interrupted us. Her hands hovered over the empty cradle next to our bed, where Ruby should have been sleeping. "She's gone!" Her voice quivered with panic. Adrenaline surged through me. I leapt out of bed, heart racing. I grabbed my robe, shrugging it on as I moved, and snatched a flashlight from the dresser drawer. "Call the police!" I shouted over my shoulder to Yolanda, my voice steady but my mind racing with fear. Could Ruby have somehow made her way outside? The thought was absurd. She was too young to even walk, let alone climb out of her cradle. But with the night's earlier unease, nothing felt impossible. I burst through the back door, emerging onto the lawn where the early morning dew chilled the air. The moon, now a mere sliver near the horizon, veiled itself behind a curtain of clouds. This cast ominous shadows, turning the familiar into the foreboding. The Bouncy castle loomed ahead, an eerie silhouette that seemed to watch me approach. The beam from the flashlight sliced through the darkness, its light bouncing off the castle's walls as I drew closer. "Ruby!" My voice sounded loud and desperate in the stillness of the night. I moved cautiously inside the Bouncy castle, my flashlight's beam revealing vivid splashes of blue, yellow, and red against the pressing darkness. I was certain this castle had only 4 small rooms when we set it up, but now, there it was, an unfamiliar opening leading to a 5th chamber I couldn't remember at all. My brain scrambled to make sense of it, trying to align the castle's outer size with this unexpected inner space. With each tentative step, the muffled cries from inside grew louder, guiding me toward that new, mysterious section. The sound seemed to spill from the unexplained opening, a gap in the fabric of the castle that I was almost sure hadn't been there before. I paused, the beam of my flashlight quivering as it illuminated the opening. In that moment of doubt, I tried to reassure myself. Surely this opening had always been there. Anything else would defy reason. Swallowing the lump in my throat, ignoring my gut feelings for the sake of my child, I nudged aside my apprehension and stepped into the 5th chamber, the cries now clearer, urging me on. The chamber was a carbon copy of the others, small and barren. But the crying, it was oddly coming from below. "Hello!" I shouted. My eyes darted to each corner as I moved toward the center of the room. "I'm armed," I lied. "I'm not scared." My feet slipped. I tumbled down an unseen, inflated decline that had been shrouded in shadow. My flashlight escaped my grip, tumbling away and casting wild arcs of light around me as I flailed, desperate to stop my unexpected slide. Then, a splash. The flashlight, a few feet away, flickered erratically, reflecting off the water. I was submerged, water closing over my head. Panic surged. I thrashed in the darkness, struggling to find up and down until I broke the surface, gulping down air. As my pounding heart calmed, I realized the water was shallow, barely reaching my knees. I had been rolling in a frantic tangle, disoriented by the sudden fall and the shock of the cold water. The weight of my soaked robe made me shudder in the chill. I reached for the flashlight, grateful to see its light still piercing the murkiness. It cast a glow on the strangely whimsical inflatable ground beneath the layer of cold, still water. I grabbed the flashlight, sweeping the beam across this strange expanse. It stretched out like a hidden cavern, a vast open space echoing the Bouncy castle's colorful theme, yet on a scale that made no sense. The crying echoed off the walls, an unyielding soundtrack to this surreal scene. "What the hell, what the hell, what the hell?" I whispered in a frantic rhythm, my breaths quick and shallow, mirroring the pounding of my heart. I spun in a full circle, taking in the extent of the place, then fixed my eyes on the slope I had unintentionally descended. Moving through the water, I made my way back to it and began to climb, but it was no use. The surface was as slick as if slathered in soap. My feet slipped and I slid back to the bottom. "Yolanda!" My voice boomed, a desperate plea into the vastness. "Help! I'm down here!" I paused, taking a deep breath before calling out again, louder. "Yolanda, can you hear me? Hello!" The words bounced off the inflatable walls, seemingly absorbed by the expansive, mysterious space. Yolanda's response was absent. Frustration knotted in my chest as I halted, trying to gather my thoughts. But the stillness was short-lived. There was a sudden disturbance in the water, a series of splashes, erratic and startling. My heart lurched with every splash, each one echoing through the vast chamber. I whipped the flashlight's beam across the water, hunting for the source of the disturbance. For a moment, there was nothing but ripples. Then, at the very edge of the light, a sleek, dark shape zipped out of view. It was too large, too quick to be any ordinary fish. It reminded me of an eel, but nothing like I'd seen before. And just like that, it was gone, vanishing back into the darkness. My mind screamed to flee. In a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the slippery slope, giving it everything I had to scramble up. But it was futile. The incline defeated me again, sending me sliding back down. With no other option, I turned and splashed through the water, heading for what looked like a set of inflated stairs. They led upward to a corridor that promised escape from the water, and the unnerving creature lurking within it. Clambering onto the stairs was like scaling a mountain made of marshmallows. I slipped and stumbled, each misstep fueling my fear that the creature might be snapping at my heels. Finally, I hauled myself up and out of the water's chilling embrace. In front of me, a corridor built of the same inflatable plastic stretched into obscurity. I pushed myself to a stand, the flashlight in my hand a feeble guard against the enveloping darkness. The corridor seemed to swallow the light, devouring it before it could reveal what lay at the end. As I trudged forward, the surreal nature of my predicament settled heavily on my shoulders. This was no dream. This cold, this fear, they were all too real, too biting to be figments of my imagination. But as much as I reached for a logical explanation, my mind came up empty. The corridor opened up to reveal more chambers branching off, a labyrinth of colorful, inflated walls. The cries, desperate wails and soft sobs, filtered through the air, a chorus that seemed both near and far. I followed the sound, my wet footsteps squeaking on the vinyl floor, my breathing ragged in my ears. "Ruby!" I yelled. "I'm here! Daddy's coming for you!" With every turn, the crying seemed to grow a touch louder, a sign I was inching closer to its source, to Ruby. I lost track of time in that sprawling maze of color and air. Hours could have been minutes. Minutes could have been hours. But they all slipped by as I wandered, each step as uncertain as the last. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I slumped into a corner of one of the countless chambers, my energy spent. I clicked the flashlight off in an attempt to preserve what little battery life remained, and I was left with the soundtrack of the distant, sorrowful wails and the soft, skittering sounds that reminded me of rats in the walls. "Hold out, Ruby," I whispered under my breath. "Daddy just needs to rest for a moment." I might have dozed, or perhaps I simply lay in a stupor, but after what felt like an age, I summoned the will to continue. The flashlight flickered back to life, its beam cutting through the blackness once more. The further I delved, the more the labyrinth seemed to evolve around me. The chambers became more complex. Stairways spiraled upward into shadows beyond my light's reach, and bridges spanned over unfathomable depths, leaving me dizzy with vertigo. I navigated pedways that crisscrossed high above the ground, giving me the sensation of navigating through a city made of nothing but air and brightly colored plastic. This inflated empire seemed to know no bounds, and as I moved through it, a mixture of awe and terror filled me, compelling me forward in search of Ruby. The thought of retracing my steps loomed over me like a shadow, but I quickly realized I had no clue how to navigate back to the start. The twists and turns had disoriented me completely. Despair took hold, and I found myself weeping, my sobs a quiet echo to the endless cries that filled the space. Yet surrender was not an option. Somewhere beyond this inflatable expanse, Ethan and Yolanda were waiting, probably frantic with worry. And somewhere ahead of me, Ruby was waiting, depending on me for her rescue. The thought of them gave me the strength to push through the despair. I had to continue, for them and for myself. As I drew closer to the source of the crying, a macabre discovery halted me. Human bones lay scattered across the chamber floors. Their stark whiteness was a ghastly contrast to the vibrant hues that surrounded me. Each set of remains bore the marks of severe trauma, with cracks and other damage that told a silent tale of violence. My heart pounding, I steadied my breathing and proceeded with newfound caution, the weight of the grim scene heavy on my mind. The chilling cries had become a beacon in the darkness, guiding me, and when they surged closer, my pulse quickened. I directed my flashlight ahead with shaking hands, and in that narrow beam, I caught the sorrowful visage of a baby's face. A wave of euphoria crashed over me. Ruby! But it shattered just as quickly when I realized this child, with hair as dark as the space around us, was not my daughter. Yet, this discovery was a glimmer of hope. If this child was here, then perhaps Ruby was too, waiting to be found. My heart clung to that hope, but the moment splintered when the baby's face jerked in an unnatural rhythm, swaying to the right and then to the left. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. Stepping backwards, I watched in stunned silence as several red, ominous lights blinked to life behind the child's face, and a symphony of clicks melded with its wails. The infant's face, anguished and alone, suddenly lurched out from the shadow on what I first thought was a pendulum. My mind struggled to comprehend as the true horror emerged from the dark. The head lacked a body. It was attached to an antenna on an immense centipede-like beast, a grotesque mockery of an anglerfish's lure. This wasn't an animal. It was an abomination, a terror from a realm beyond my understanding, and it was advancing toward me, each segment of its body a testament to the nightmares that now surrounded me. Panic surged through my veins as the monstrous centipede, vast as a freight train, began its pursuit. The eerie mimic of a toddler's head dangled grotesquely, swaying from side to side like a hypnotist's watch, a morbid pendulum marking each thunderous beat of my racing heart. I turned and fled, my feet desperately seeking purchase on the treacherous, bouncy terrain. Each step was a gamble, the inflated ground beneath me both a savior and a traitor. It absorbed some of the creature's momentum, yet threatened to throw me off balance with every leap I took. The air was thick with the heavy, rubbery scent of the inflated world, and the cacophony of the child's cries blended with the skittering clicks of the creature's multitude of legs. It was a relentless sound, a reminder that the abomination was close, its every movement vibrating through the walls of the labyrinth. My lungs heaved, struggling to draw in air in quick, desperate gasps. The once whimsical chambers now a neon-colored nightmare that blurred past me. The kaleidoscope of colors was dizzying, disorienting, but terror lent me a clarity of purpose. I couldn't let myself be caught. I had to survive, to find Ruby, to escape this hellish place. I risked a glance back and saw the creature's countless eyes reflecting the light from my flashlight, a constellation of malice and hunger. It navigated the bouncy corridors with terrifying agility, its body coiling and uncoiling, propelling it forward in a fluid, menacing dance. Ahead, the path forked abruptly. I made a split-second decision, veering left with no time to ponder the odds of it being the right choice. Panic seized me as I hurtled into the abrupt end of the inflated corridor, the monstrous centipede bearing down behind me with the terrifying duality of innocence and horror, the child's head swinging unnervingly on its appendage. My breaths came in ragged gasps, each one a sharp stab in my chest. A pit lay before me, a gaping maw in the brightly colored expanse, the edges of it as deceptive and treacherous as the creature behind me. I felt the ground shiver with the weight of the advancing abomination, its many-legged form propelling it forward with a speed that belied its size. The childlike cries mixed with the creature's natural hiss, a jarring medley that echoed my growing dread. There was no time to think, no moment to weigh options. The beast was upon me, and the pit offered the only respite from certain death. The edge, with its narrow ledge, was no place for a standoff. With a fleeting look into the pit's seemingly bottomless depths, the decision made itself. The darkness below was unknown. It was terror incognita, but the horror behind me was all too real, all too immediate. I lunged forward, the soles of my feet leaving the inflatable ground as the creature's gaping jaws snapped shut where I had just been. Airborne, I was a comet diving into the night, surrendering to the abyss with a mix of despair and the will to survive. Wind rushed past me, a howling testament to my descent. I braced for an impact that might never come, or that might come too swiftly. Below, the darkness was not silent. It seemed to whisper with voices unknown, perhaps with the cries of those who had leapt before me. Down, down I fell, into the unknown, into the very belly of the labyrinth, perhaps even into the heart of a mystery far greater than the sum of my fears. I had escaped the jaws of the beast, but at what cost? Only the abyss would have the answer. I came to with the gritty taste of earth in my mouth and the riotous chorus of a jungle alive around me. Pushing myself up, I took in the lush greenery of the expanse, a world away from any bouncy castle or suburban backyard. Towering above me, entwined by the relentless grasp of vines, stood overgrown columns. Each was etched with the sinuous form of a centipede, an echo of the horror I had fled. Days melded into one another as I wandered the emerald labyrinth, each step a prayer for survival. When my strength waned and my spirit teetered on the brink of despair, salvation came in the form of an indigenous tribe. They found me, delirious and on the edge of collapse, by a riverbank. With a kindness that knew no language barrier, they took me in. Their care was the balm to my frayed senses, their nourishing meals a lifeline thrown across the abyss of my starvation. It was only now I realized I had ended up in the heart of the Amazonian jungle. As I regained my strength, I learned a lot from the tribesmen, adapting to the rhythm of a life so starkly different from my own. In time, they guided me back to the periphery of their secluded world, to a place where the dense veil of the jungle peeled back to reveal the bones of civilization. With a mixture of regret and relief, I bid them farewell, carrying with me the profound impact of their generosity and the indelible mark of their wisdom. The journey home was a blur, each mode of transport drawing me further from the surreal and back into the realm of the painfully real. And now, I sit in the quiet of my suburban home, a place once filled with peace, now a haunting reminder of our lost little girl. Yolanda shared that during my absence, the bouncy castle was seized for evidence, but nothing unusual was found. No tangible proof to support my story. I'm burdened with a truth no one will believe, and in that, I find myself isolated. But surrender isn't in my nature. I'm determined to return to the jungle, to the tribe, and to those enigmatic stone columns, standing tall like silent guardians of ancient secrets.